When I stepped off the plane after a year abroad, the fatigue hit me hard. It wasn't just the jet lag, it was everything. A year spent navigating the complexities of an overseas assignment had drained me in ways I couldn't explain. Amanda, my wife, had been the one who convinced me to go in the first place. "It'll set us up for life," she'd said, her hand resting gently on mine as her eyes lit up with optimism. "We'll finally be able to get ahead, Matthew. This opportunity is too good to pass up." I wasn't so sure at the time, but her insistence and the promise of a better future swayed me. Amanda always had a way of pushing just hard enough to get her way without making it obvious. Now, standing on my own front porch, duffel bag in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The porch light flickered above me, and the house, though unchanged, felt unfamiliar. I chalked it up to the time away. Maybe a year was just long enough for home to feel like a stranger. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the duffel bag, and opened the door. The smell of lavender, the signature scent Amanda always used to fill the house, hit me first, but it was mingled with something else. A hint of cologne, sharp and unfamiliar. "Amanda?" I called out, stepping into the living room. Her voice floated down the hallway, cheerful and sweet, like she'd been waiting for this moment all day. "Matthew. You're home." She appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel, her smile as radiant as I remembered. But it didn't feel the same. Then my eyes dropped to her midsection, and my world tilted. "Amanda," I could barely get the words out. "You're pregnant." She paused, her smile faltering for the briefest moment before she plastered it back on. "Of course," she said, her voice bright and airy, though I thought I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "It's yours, Matthew. We should celebrate." Her arms wrapped around me in a warm hug, but I felt frozen. I hadn't expected this, any of it. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind, but I pushed them aside for the time being. I told myself to breathe, to focus. After all, I just walked through the door. That evening, I sat on the back porch, sipping a beer and trying to wrap my head around everything. Amanda was inside, humming a tune as she tidied up. I should have been happy to be home, relieved to see her, but the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. "Matt." I turned to see Mark leaning on the fence that separated our yards. He was holding a beer of his own, his expression hesitant. Mark and I had been friends for years, ever since we bought our house. He was the kind of guy who always had a joke ready, but tonight, he looked serious. "Hey, Mark," I said, gesturing for him to come over. "You caught me deep in thought." He climbed over the fence, his usual casual swagger missing. "Yeah, I figured. Mind if I sit?" "Of course not. What's on your mind?" He took a long swig of his beer before meeting my eyes. "Matt, I've been trying to figure out how to say this, how to tell you. But now that you're here, I think you need to know." His tone made my chest tighten. "What are you talking about?" Mark shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "It's Amanda," he said finally. "While you were gone, she's been seeing people." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What do you mean, seeing people?" He hesitated, clearly regretting bringing this up, but he pressed on. "Fancy cars pulling up at odd hours. Guys coming and going." I thought it was weird, but I didn't want to assume. "I figured maybe you had family visiting or something." But then it kept happening. One guy in particular, slick suit, silver car, I've seen him here more than a few times. I didn't want to believe it, but... My beer slipped from my hand, landing with a dull thud on the porch. "You're saying, she's been cheating on me?" Mark looked pained. "I don't know for sure, man. But it doesn't look good." "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and inescapable. I wanted to shout, to accuse Mark of lying, but deep down, I knew he wasn't. The unease I'd felt since I arrived suddenly made sense. "Thanks for telling me," I said after a long silence, though the words felt hollow. Mark nodded, his expression heavy with sympathy. "I didn't want to, but you deserve to know. If there's anything I can do, just say the word." He left me alone on the porch, the weight of his revelation settling over me like a lead blanket. I sat there for hours, replaying every conversation I'd had with Amanda over the past year. Her insistence that I take the job. Her occasional missed calls. The distance in her voice sometimes, brushed off as exhaustion. When I finally went inside, Amanda was already asleep, her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. I stood in the doorway, staring at her peaceful face, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. I thought I'd come home to a fresh start, to the life we dreamed of building together. Instead, I felt like a stranger in my own home, my marriage built on a foundation of lies. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. And I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Amanda sat across from me at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tracing circles on the surface. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Her growing belly made the scene almost surreal, as if I were trapped in some twisted version of my old life. "You're not serious, Matt," she said, her voice trembling just enough to make her sound innocent. "You're actually questioning me about this?" "Of course I am," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Mark told me about the cars, the men. He said they've been coming and going while I've been gone. Amanda, I need the truth." Her eyes widened, her lips parting in an exaggerated gasp. "Mark? That nosy busybody? You're taking his word over mine." She folded her arms over her chest, her defensive posture a stark contrast to the soft, nurturing image of an expectant mother. "Unbelievable. He's always hated me." "This isn't about Mark," I said firmly. "It's about you and what's been happening in this house." Amanda leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You've been gone for a year, Matt. A whole year. You think I haven't been lonely? But you're wrong if you think I'd ever cheat on you. That baby is yours, and I've done nothing wrong." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. They felt rehearsed, too perfect to be genuine. "You expect me to believe that when there's evidence staring me in the face?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. She slammed her hands on the table. "What evidence? A neighbor's gossip? You're being paranoid, Matt. This is what stress does to you, you start imagining things." Her deflection was flawless, and for a moment, I almost doubted myself. But then I remembered the cologne I'd smelled when I walked through the door. The hollow feeling in my chest returned, and I knew I had to keep digging. The next day, I went through our finances. What I found shook me. Our savings account, which had been healthy before I left, was almost empty. Bills were overdue, and there were transactions that didn't make sense, charges at high-end restaurants, boutique stores, and luxury services. Confronting Amanda about it later, I tried to keep my tone measured. "Where's the money, Amanda? Our savings are gone." Her face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about? I've been taking care of everything. Maybe you forgot how expensive it is to live." "Don't treat me like an idiot," I shot back, tossing a printout of the bank statement onto the table. "You've been spending money on things we don't need. Designer bags? Spa treatments? Who are you trying to impress?" Amanda grabbed the paper, her hands shaking slightly as she scanned it. This is ridiculous. I don't know what half of this is. Maybe it's a mistake at the bank." "You're lying." The words hung in the air between us, cold and heavy. She threw the paper back at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't believe you don't trust me. After everything, this is what I get." The sight of her crying might have once broken me. Now, it only deepened my resolve. That evening, Mark came by again. He stood in the doorway, his face clouded with concern. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news again, Matt," he said, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one else was listening. "But there's something you need to know." "More?" I asked, weary. "It's that guy I told you about," he said. "The one in the silver car. I saw him again today. He picked her up around noon. They didn't look like friends." My stomach churned. "You're sure it's the same guy?" Mark nodded. "Positive. I've seen him enough times to recognize him now. You should confront him, Matt. Find out what's going on." His words gave me the push I needed. The next day, I waited outside the house, hidden in my car down the street. I hated spying on my own wife, but I needed to know the truth. Around noon, the silver car pulled up, just as Mark had said. A man in an expensive suit stepped out and walked confidently to the door. Amanda emerged minutes later, her face lighting up as she greeted him. I followed them to a cafe on the other side of town, parking a few spots away. They chose a table by the window, and I watched as the man leaned in close, speaking in hushed tones. Amanda's face alternated between laughter and a coy smile that made my blood boil. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of the car and walked into the cafe. My heart pounded in my chest, but my mind was razor-sharp. "Amanda," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient chatter. Her head snapped up, her face turning as pale as the cream in her coffee. "Matt. What are you doing here?" I ignored her and turned to the man. "Who are you?" He looked me over, his expression calm but calculating. "Jason," he said smoothly, extending a hand I didn't take. "I take it you're Matthew." The casual way he said my name sent a wave of fury through me. "What's your relationship with my wife?" Jason leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I think Amanda should explain that." I turned to her, waiting for an answer. She was flustered, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap. "Matt, it's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Then explain it," I said, my voice low and steady, though every nerve in my body was on edge. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jason stood, pulling cash from his wallet and tossing it on the table. "I think this is my cue to leave," he said, flashing a smirk. As he walked past me, I grabbed his arm. "You're not going anywhere until I get some answers." "Look, buddy," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I didn't know she was still with you. She told me you were separated. This is awkward for all of us, so let's just call it a day." He yanked his arm free and walked out, leaving me standing there, my mind racing. Jason's departure from the cafe felt like the closing act of a poorly written play. His dismissive attitude, the way he strolled out like none of this mattered, infuriated me. But the spotlight was still on Amanda. She sat frozen, her gaze fixed on the table, avoiding the storm in my eyes. "You told him we were separated," I said, my voice low but trembling with controlled anger. "How many other lies have you been telling, Amanda?" She finally looked up, her eyes wide and brimming with fake innocence. "Matt, it's not what you think. I didn't know how to handle things while you were gone." I leaned in, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "Then enlighten me. How does lying to someone about our marriage, our life, make sense? Start talking." Her mouth opened, but the usual excuses didn't come out. For the first time, Amanda seemed cornered. Jason's just someone I met at work," she stammered. "We started talking, and You what?" I snapped, my voice cutting through her attempt at an explanation. "You thought it was okay to let him into your life while I was gone." "Into our life?" Her tears started then, but they felt rehearsed, like the same routine I'd seen in countless petty arguments before. "You left, Matthew. You left me alone for an entire year," she cried, her voice rising in desperation. And that gave you permission to sleep with someone else? My words hit like bullets, cold and deliberate. She buried her face in her hands. I made a mistake, okay? But the baby, it's yours. I swear it's yours, Matt. I've never stopped loving you. Stop lying, Amanda. I pushed my chair back and stood, glaring down at her. If that child is mine, you won't mind proving it. Back at the house, Amanda retreated into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stayed in the living room, the anger in me slowly giving way to a hollow numbness. The quiet of the house felt suffocating, broken only by the occasional muffled sobs from Amanda. The next morning, I laid out my terms. We're doing a paternity test, I said, placing the paperwork on the counter. If the baby's mine, I'll step up. But if it's not, Amanda, I'm done. You've destroyed everything we built together. Her face went pale as she looked at the forms, her hand trembling as she reached for them. Matt, this is unnecessary. I told you. You've told me a lot of things, I interrupted, my tone icy. And most of them have been lies. So, forgive me if I don't take your word for it anymore. She tried to argue, but the weight of the situation seemed to crush her resolve. In the end, she signed the consent forms, and we went to the clinic later that day. The 2 weeks it took for the results to come back felt like a lifetime. Every day, I noticed more cracks in Amanda's facade. She tried to act normal, cooking dinner, tidying the house, but I could see her unease in the way her hands shook or how her smile never quite reached her eyes. Meanwhile, I avoided her as much as possible. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her, knowing the betrayal she was desperately trying to cover up. When the results finally arrived, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the envelope in my hands. Amanda lingered in the doorway, watching me with a mix of hope and dread. Open it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tore into the envelope, my hand surprisingly steady. The words on the page confirmed what I'd already suspected, 99.99% not a match. The silence in the room was deafening as I set the paper down on the table. I looked up at Amanda, who had gone ghostly pale. It's not mine, I said flatly. She stumbled forward, grabbing the paper and scanning it as if she could will the results to change. No. No, this can't be right, she murmured. It's right, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And now, I want you to tell me the truth, Amanda. Who's the father? Her lip quivered, and fresh tears streamed down her face. It's Jason, she finally admitted, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to happen, Matt. I swear. It just happened. I stared at her, struggling to process the depth of her betrayal. You didn't mean for it to happen. I echoed bitterly. You didn't mean to destroy our marriage. To take everything we had and throw it away for what? A fling? It wasn't like that, she sobbed, falling to her knees. Please, Matt, I was lonely. I didn't know how to cope with you being gone. I made a mistake, but I love you. I love us. We can get past this. Her cries echoed through the room, but they didn't reach me. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built, it was all a lie. You love me? I asked, my voice sharp. You don't even respect me. If you did, you'd never have done this. Amanda crawled forward, clutching at my legs like a drowning person reaching for a lifeline. Don't leave me, Matt. Please. I can't do this without you. I stepped back, her hands slipping away. You've been doing it without me for a year, Amanda. You'll figure it out. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned and walked out of the room. I needed air, space, anything to clear my head. That night, as I lay awake on the couch, I heard Amanda shuffling around upstairs. She didn't come down to speak to me, and I didn't go up to confront her. Whatever was left between us had been shattered beyond repair. By the next morning, my decision was made. I'll be filing for divorce, I told her over coffee, my voice calm but resolute. I'll also be putting the house up for sale. I want this done as quickly as possible. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew there was no point. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. So am I replied, though I wasn't sure I meant it. The morning after I told Amanda about the divorce, I got to work. I wasn't just leaving her, I was reclaiming everything she had taken from me. Quietly and methodically, I began building my case, piece by piece. I spent hours at the dining table, going through months of bank statements and credit card transactions. The evidence was all there: lavish dinners, boutique shopping sprees, luxury services I'd never heard of. All while bills went unpaid and the savings I had worked so hard to build disappeared. Next, I went through the messages on her old phone, which she'd carelessly left behind when upgrading. My heart ached as I scrolled through conversations with Jason and, to my disgust, a few other names. They weren't just friendly exchanges. The messages were explicit, each one another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But I didn't let the pain consume me. Instead, I saved everything: screenshots, printouts, and even voice messages where Amanda spoke about their plans for our house. I knew I couldn't go to court empty-handed, so I reached out to a lawyer. Sarah, a no-nonsense professional who came highly recommended, didn't sugarcoat anything. "You've got a strong case, Matthew," she said, flipping through the stack of evidence I'd compiled. "But be prepared, she'll fight back, and it's going to get ugly." "That's fine," I replied. "I'm ready for whatever she throws at me." Amanda wasn't going to make it easy, and I knew it. Sure enough, once she realized I was serious about the divorce, she launched a counterattack. She told anyone who would listen that I was controlling and emotionally distant, painting herself as the victim in our crumbling marriage. The lies stung, but I didn't waste time defending myself with words. Instead, I let my actions, and my evidence, speak for me. I started reaching out to mutual friends and family, sitting down with them one by one to explain the situation. I didn't make it dramatic or bitter, I simply laid out the facts. "She cheated on me," I said to her sister during a tense coffee meeting. "I have proof, texts, receipts, everything. I'm not asking you to pick sides, but I thought you deserved to hear the truth from me." Her sister, to my surprise, sighed heavily and said, "Honestly, I'm not surprised. Amanda always had a way of taking things too far." "I'm sorry, Matt." Most of our mutual connections reacted the same way, their initial shock giving way to quiet support. By the time Amanda realized what was happening, it was too late. The tide of public opinion had turned against her, and her attempts to smear me only made her look desperate. Mark, ever loyal, became an unofficial spokesperson for my side of the story. "Matt's a good guy," he'd tell neighbors and acquaintances. "Amanda messed up, and now she's paying the price." The real blow came when Sarah served Amanda with the eviction papers. I hadn't told her beforehand that the house was solely in my name. She'd assumed that after the divorce, she'd get to stay there, maybe even keep the property entirely. The look on her face when she read the papers was priceless. "You're kicking me out," she shrieked, clutching the document as if it might burst into flames. "This house is mine," I said calmly. "You made your choices, Amanda. Now you'll have to live with the consequences." Her anger quickly turned to panic. "But where am I supposed to go?" "Matt, I have nowhere else." "Maybe Jason can help you out," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You seemed pretty confident when you brought him here behind my back." She didn't respond, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. By the end of the month, Amanda and Jason were packing up their things. I didn't stick around to watch them go, but Mark gave me the play-by-play later. "She was a mess," he said, barely able to contain his grin. "Jason looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were fighting the whole time." "That sounds about right," I replied, though I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Watching Amanda's life unravel wasn't the victory I thought it would be. It didn't erase the betrayal or the pain, but it did give me a sense of closure. I'd taken back what was mine, my house, my reputation, my dignity. Once Amanda was gone, I began the process of reclaiming my home. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and cleared out every trace of her. The house felt lighter without her presence, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Friends and neighbors started coming around more often, offering their support. "You deserve better, Matt," Mrs. Peterson, our elderly neighbor, told me one afternoon. "You've always been a good man, and now everyone sees it." Their words meant more than I could express. The lies Amanda had spread were nothing compared to the truth, and now that truth was on my side. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with Mark, a beer in hand, I reflected on everything that had happened. "I don't get it," I said, staring out at the darkening sky. "How someone can throw away their entire life for, what? A fling?" Mark shrugged. "Some people don't realize what they have until it's gone. She probably thought she'd get away with it." "She almost did," I admitted. "If it wasn't for you." He waved me off. "Don't give me all the credit. You stood up for yourself, Matt. A lot of guys wouldn't have had the guts to do what you did." I nodded, though part of me still wondered if I'd handled everything the right way. Amanda's humiliation, while justified, didn't feel as satisfying as I'd imagined. When I walked through my front door that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a flicker of hope for the future. The house was mine again, and so was my life. Amanda and Jason were gone, and they weren't coming back. But now, standing in the quiet of my reclaimed home, I couldn't help but wonder, was taking everything back enough? The first thing I did after Amanda and Jason left was open all the windows. For too long, the house had been filled with her lies, her deceit, and the bitterness of what we'd become. I let the cool breeze sweep through, carrying away the stale air and leaving behind something lighter, something that almost felt like hope. Mark showed up the next morning, toolbox in hand. "Thought you might need some help," he said, clapping me on the back. Over the next few weeks, we worked together to erase every trace of Amanda from the house. We painted over the soft beige walls she had chosen, replacing them with a bold, deep blue that made the space feel like my own again. Her expensive decorative pillows, the ones I'd never been allowed to touch, went straight into the donation bin. We rearranged the furniture, moved out the ornate mirror Jason had gifted her, and replaced it with a framed photo of my parents. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like home again, not the home I'd shared with Amanda, but a new version of it, one that was entirely mine. With every room we finished, I felt a weight lifting. The bedroom was the hardest to tackle. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, and memories of nights we'd spent laughing, arguing, and pretending everything was fine threatened to overwhelm me. Mark didn't push me, but he stayed close, ready to lend a hand when I was ready. One evening, I finally summoned the courage to go through the last of her things. Her jewelry box, her half of the closet, the letters she'd written me when we were first dating, it all went into a box. I didn't burn it, though I thought about it. Instead, I dropped it off at her sister's house, along with a note, "Take this to Amanda. I don't want it anymore." That night, I slept better than I had in months. Once the house was fully reclaimed, I started thinking about selling it. It had been my dream home once, but now it felt like a reminder of everything I'd lost. Besides, I wanted a fresh start. I contacted a realtor, who was thrilled at the property's potential. "This place will sell in no time," she said, walking through the freshly painted rooms. "And at a great price, too." The idea of leaving didn't feel as daunting as I'd expected. In fact, it felt freeing. In the weeks that followed, I began to hear bits and pieces about Amanda's new life, or lack of one. Jason, it seemed, had fled not long after they moved out. He'd realized quickly that Amanda was more trouble than she was worth, especially without access to my money. "She's staying with her sister," Mark said one evening, over beers on the back porch. "Barely scraping by. Word is, she's been trying to find a new guy to latch onto, but no one's biting." I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. If anything, I felt nothing. Amanda's downfall wasn't something I needed to celebrate. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't about watching her suffer. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace of mind, and my future. As the "for sale" sign went up in the yard, I started making plans for what came next. I found a small but cozy house on the other side of town, a fixer-upper with a big yard and enough space for the kind of life I wanted to build. Mark helped me move, hauling furniture and cracking jokes about how I'd finally be able to decorate the way I wanted. "No more floral curtains or throw pillows, huh?" he said, grinning. "Never again," I replied, laughing for what felt like the first time in years. Settling into the new place was a fresh start in every sense. I took my time making it mine, hanging photos, planting a garden, and building a small workshop in the garage. I started reconnecting with old friends, going to the gym, and even picking up a few hobbies I'd put aside during my marriage. One day, I ran into Amanda's sister at the grocery store. She looked awkward, unsure of whether to say anything, but I gave her a polite nod. "She's not doing well," she blurted out, catching me off guard. I didn't respond right away, letting her words hang in the air. "She made a lot of mistakes," she continued, almost apologetically. "But, she does regret it, Matt. She talks about you all the time." I met her eyes and said calmly, "Regret doesn't change what happened. I've moved on. I hope she finds a way to do the same." Her sister nodded, looking relieved. "Take care of yourself, Matt." "You too," I said, and that was the last time I heard anything about Amanda. Months later, as I stood in my garden watching the sun set over my new home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up, free from the lies and betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me. Mark still came over occasionally, and I'd even started dating again, cautiously but optimistically. The best part of my revenge wasn't Amanda's humiliation or Jason's hasty departure. It was knowing that I'd taken back control of my life. I hadn't just survived the storm, I'd come out stronger. As the evening light faded, I raised a beer to the sky, silently toasting the future. For the first time in years, it felt bright.